Welcome back to Joker's Knowledge. Today we open a file that stretches across the entire history of civilization. The long story of how rulers learned to make people control themselves. No chains, no soldiers, no cages. Just belief, fear, and social pressure. Invisible tools that turned ordinary citizens into their own wardens. When we think of manipulation, we imagine propaganda or brainwazing, but the real art of manipulation is far older. It is the slow evolution of psychological control, teaching human beings to obey without being forced. Modern societies call it discipline. Empires called it order. Psychologists call it internalization of authority. To understand how we reached a world where most people censor themselves before they ever speak, we must trace the method's history. How power discovered that the most efficient prison is built in the mind. The story begins thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and early China. Rulers faced a problem. Their armies could not watch every citizen, so they needed a system that made obedience feel natural. The first solution was divine authority. Kings declared themselves chosen by the gods. Law became sacred. Disobedience became sin. When Hammurabi carved his code into stone around 1750 BCE, it wasn't just legal instruction. It was psychological conditioning. By presenting rules as divine truth, he made rebellion feel not only illegal, but unholy. The priests enforced belief, not with swords, but with ritual and fear of eternal punishment. This was the first great discovery of mental control. A man who fears invisible punishment polices himself forever. As societies grew, public violence lost efficiency. You couldn't whip 1,000 people each day, but you could teach them to whip themselves with shame. Anthropologists call this the shift from external punishment to internal morality. In Greece and Rome, philosophers began linking virtue to citizenship. The ideal citizen behaved honorably, even when unseen. The Stoics called it reason, but governments recognized its value. A population that believes goodness equals obedience requires fewer guards. In China, Confucius created a moral code centered on harmony and duty. Know your place, respect your elders, obey the emperor. It worked so well that dynasties survived centuries using ritual and guilt instead of terror. By the Middle Ages, religion had refined control into a science of the soul. The church taught that sin could be committed in thought alone. That single idea turned the entire human mind into a courtroom. No priest needed to see you. You saw yourself through God's imagined eyes. Confession completed the loop. The guilty willingly reported their own crimes. It was the perfect surveillance system. Voluntary, moral, eternal. During Islamic and Christian empires alike, rulers and clerics aligned. Kings claimed divine right. Priests sanctified kings. Spiritual obedience became political loyalty. The sword of faith did what armies could not. It colonized conscience. The Enlightenment shattered the church's monopoly, but did not end manipulation. It made it secular. As Europe industrialized, kings and clergy gave way to bureaucrats and schoolmasters. Factories required punctual, obedient, literate workers. Thus emerged the modern education system, modeled on military drills and church routines. Children learn to sit still, follow bells, respect hierarchy, and compete for grades. No one called it control. They called it progress. The Prussian model, adopted across Europe and America, replaced fear of God with fear of failure. A new virtue appeared: discipline, moral obedience rebranded for the machine age. Michel Foucault would later call this era the birth of the disciplinary society. Power no longer needed to punish bodies. It trained minds through routine. The factory, the classroom, and the barracks all ran on the same rhythm. Obey the clock, follow orders, seek approval. In the 19th and 20th centuries, psychology put language to what rulers had practiced by instinct. Even Pavlov discovered conditioning, the reflex shaped by repetition. B.F. Skinner proved that reward and punishment could sculpt behavior with precision. Edward Bernays, nephew of Freud, applied psychoanalysis to advertising and propaganda, showing that desires could be manufactured. Governments used these discoveries during both world wars. Posters, films, and slogans bypassed reason and triggered emotion: fear, pride, belonging. When peace returned, corporations kept the same tools to sell products instead of patriotism. By mid-century, manipulation no longer needed kings or clergy. Science had inherited the throne. Control had become empirical, measurable, repeatable, a technology. After 1945, fear of annihilation made obedience patriotic again. The Soviet bloc enforced conformity through ideology. The West achieved it through consumption. Television became the new pulpit, broadcasting ideals of success and normality. Suburbia, etiquette, corporate loyalty, all forms of gentle control. Sociologists noticed a pattern. Citizens began monitoring one another for signs of nonconformity. To be normal was safety. To be different was risk. Thus, self-policing became cultural habit. No dictator ordered it. The crowd did. In the digital era, the architecture of control became invisible and personal. Algorithms replaced supervisors. Metrics replaced morals. Instead of priests hearing confessions, we upload them ourselves. Every search, like, and message becomes data used to predict and influence behavior. But the principle is ancient. Create awareness of observation, and the subject will behave. Jeremy Bentham's 18th century idea of the panopticon, a prison where inmates self-regulate because they might be watched, and finally came true. We carry the tower in our pockets. The light never turns off. The brilliance of modern power is that it no longer needs to command. It simply offers convenience. You obey for comfort now, not fear. That is the final stage of manipulation: voluntary servitude. Think about this. From birth, every structure around you, family, school, media, work, has trained you to anticipate judgment before action. You weigh opinions before truth, approval before authenticity. That reflex didn't evolve by accident. It was cultivated across millennia. The whip became shame. The sermon became policy. The classroom became the factory. The screen became the mirror. And through each transformation, the goal remained identical: to make you govern yourself. Real freedom begins when you recognize that the voice telling you to behave may not be your own. It might be the echo of every king, priest, and teacher, whoever wanted peace more than truth. And that closes part 1 of The Art of Manipulation: How They Make You Police Yourself. In the next file, we'll examine how this same psychological machinery merged with organized belief. How faith, once a path to meaning, became a leash of obedience. Episode 2. Religion as a leash, when faith becomes a weapon. Until then, remember, the oldest prison is still the mind, and most of us were born inside it.